as a key topic of public interest, particularly for the independent media, those that serve community needs, those that look at the profound implications of democracy, civic space, and accountability. So we saw it fit at this moment to convene a discussion on how legal frameworks can promote equitable digital ecosystems in Africa. And today I have a team of panelists. So to my left is Tim Zankel. He's a media sustainability expert, and he will introduce himself shortly. To my right is Telda Mawarire, who is media development and civic space practitioner from Zambia. And we're joined virtually by Catherine Kamau and her team from Ashitiva Advocates in Kenya. If I can ask you to just introduce yourself, Tim.
Thank you so much, Bridget, to the colleagues online and in the room. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Tim Zankel. I'm based in Johannesburg in South Africa, and I'm a media practitioner with a specific interest in community media. It's a sector that introduced me to media work, and I also have another passion around media sustainability and viability. How do we let organizations serve their communities, but at the same time generate enough income and interest for them to be viable in their different workspaces? I've had the privilege of doing a lot of work across the continent on a variety of projects, and we've seen some really interesting things, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of those today.
Thank you so much, Bridget. As you have said, my name is Telda Mawarire. I am a civic space advocate. I'm a former journalist, editor. My experience spans South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, pretty much this SADC region. So I am interested in the rights of human rights defenders, especially women human rights defenders, as well as journalists as a special interest group around human rights defenders. And my media work, I also have interest in community media that gives voices to communities. And of late, my work is around digital as well. So digital transformation, law and policy in data protection, artificial intelligence, and yeah, anything that is digital, and also ensuring that we don't leave particular groups behind in this digital transformation work. Thank you.
Thank you, Telda. Over to you, Catherine and team, if you can just introduce yourselves as well. Catherine, we can't hear you. We can see you're speaking, but we cannot hear you. No, we can't hear you. It's the other computer. Sorry, Catherine, while they're sorting out the technology issues, we're just going to move on. Oh, there you go.
are.
Now you can go ahead. Yes.
So I was going to introduce myself, and thank you, Bridget. So my name is Catherine Kamau. I am a partner at Ashitiva Advocates, and I am also the head of the Data Protection, Technology, and Corporate Governance Department. So we work around startups, multinationals, NGOs, and both public and private entities. We help them do like sort of like an end-to-end from formulation, registration, all the way to operations, and as well as winding up. So we're able to do end-to-end. So we have a lot in terms of our exposure with different entities, whether local, foreign, multinational. Also, I have a very keen interest on ICT, particularly because of the data protection angle, and a lot of the data we have interacted a lot with media entities and different laws around them, including intellectual property, matters of policy making, legislation reform. So I have also quite a number of years of experience in public policy or policy and legislative drafting. So we help both private in public entities as well as governments, because we internally have healthy governments. We help them to also come up with different laws and different policies or to amend what is existing. So we are so excited to be here, and I have my colleagues Rachel, Amanda, and Karanja, during the presentation. They're handling a question on two. Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you so much for that, Catherine. So I'm just going to start off with you, Tim and Telda. If you can each just tell us why it's important for you to address this imbalance between traditional media revenues and digital platforms' dominance. Maybe first of all, is there an imbalance from your perspective, and how do we address it?
I think, like, when I have a look at this thing, I think I always go back to the principles of what it is that we do as media. And basically, as practitioners, the one thing that we do is we create stuff, content, we put it in front of people using a platform, right? Traditionally, the platform was print, or it was traditional radio, or it was traditional television. So we still journalists creating things, and now we've got this concept of grappling with platform, right? And I do think there's a huge challenge around this concept of digital versus traditional. I think one of the challenges is for a lot of practitioners that don't understand how the digital realm works. And I think we're very quick to react to platforms that belong to other people. So your Metas, your TikToks, your WhatsApps, and all these spaces. And we don't have enough education around what that means. So we're doing all the hard work, and where previously all the hard work would escalate itself into a 10 or 15-page publication, which was ours, we now do all the hard work, and that content lives somewhere else, and we don't get any of the benefit from that. The challenge is we don't completely understand why not. And these digital companies, big digital, are way ahead of the curve. And they're monetizing, and we're only now realizing what we've done. And it's a little too late in some instances. So that's one of the things. And I think the other thing is we haven't done enough as practitioners to learn about the space. And because it moves so quickly, it's particularly challenging. So I think the short answer to your question is yes, there's a challenge. The longer answer is yes, there's a challenge, but we can't always blame someone else.
Okay, so thank you. I'll pick up from where Tim left and agree with him, definitely, that there is a challenge and an imbalance in terms of traditional media and what is earned online. So I think one of the challenges that has happened is that in terms of media sustainability, what we have done is to coach or teach media that they have to go digital. So I think this push kind of like started, I don't know, maybe in the 2000s thereabout, that everyone has to digitize. So simply what we did is take the traditional media as it is and just start translating it into digital products, and we did not evolve the business model. So the same business model of trying to find advertisers to accompany those creations that Tim was talking about that we're making is part of the problem, that the journalists have become very good at doing that, at having a Facebook page. A radio station has got a Facebook page, a Twitter account, an online version, but the model itself didn't translate to what is needed to make money online. And in that gap of like traditional media trying to digitize, as it were, other actors came on board in terms of anyone with a smartphone is now also a producer or a content creator. And they either have understood those models in terms of how to make money online, and then there's also issues of algorithms that work against traditional media, especially here in the global south. So yes, there's a problem, a huge problem, and it's not only for private media, especially even the state media, which also has got a public service function, is also in even bigger trouble when it comes to sustainability online.
Thank you, Telda. Thank you so much. So I think, on the basis of that, we agree that there's a problem. From your perspective, Catherine, from the legal side of things, you've done some research that's looked at models from different jurisdictions, Australia, Canada, I think. So which elements of these frameworks do you think could work for us in the African context? And I know you're based in Kenya, so maybe from the Kenyan context as well, because that context would be the same for almost all of us in this room. Thank you.
Yes, I hope you're hearing me now.
Perfectly.
Yes. So, as you've mentioned, yes, we did research quite across a number of countries, including Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the US, Japan, and even Indonesia. And we realized there is quite a level of similarity in terms of the things that have worked in most of these frameworks, even if the structural elements are different, but the working elements are quite similar. And also the limitations are also quite similar. And even in the Kenyan context, as you've mentioned, the things that would apply to us would likely apply to a lot of the other African countries. So some of the things that we noted worked in terms of the elements of those models is having a strong legal foundation that aligns with intellectual protections. One of the gaps that is there in terms of revenue sharing or even the traditional and the digital space is how to handle intellectual property. So we saw that a lot of these frameworks handle strongly issues of intellectual property. So there is exclusive ownership of content, and then the other persons who are using that content are licensed in that regard to either publish or use in other areas. So that's one of the elements that is most adaptable, because a lot of the African countries already have working intellectual property laws. Another thing is having mandatory bargaining structures which have backstops of dispute resolution as well as anti-discrimination rules. So you have mandated or rather mandatory bargaining arrangements where you create a structure in the sense that if somebody is coming on board as a news content creator, or somebody is coming in as the traditional media outlet, there is a certain structure within which when maybe they're getting their licensing, they have to go through a certain level of engagement in terms of what they are willing to offer in the bargaining agreements with the other news users. So that's something that we saw is an adaptable element, because it can be done to either to protect the traditional media outlets and also to protect the smaller digital content users or even the larger ones at the end of the day. Then another thing is weighted compensation. This is compensation that is not just determined by the volume, but also by your needs as a publisher, and also how you're contributing to diversity and media, something called media pluralism, which acknowledges different styles of reporting. So you have a model of compensation that just doesn't look at how much volume you're producing, but also the impact. How much are you contributing to culture? How much are you contributing to the needs of the society? How much are you contributing to even your own needs? How are you adapting to that? So that's one of the other things. The other key element was having a phased approach, where you just don't wake up one day and say, this is how we are going to do things, we are changing A, B, C, and D. One of the key elements of each of these frameworks was that it was a step-by-step approach. They moved from one phase to another phase to a third phase. Some are still continuing with the phases, and others, like maybe Australia, they are quite established, and it's actually one of the key highlights that we found in this analysis. And finally, we had an issue of, we had an element of something we saw called transparency that is backed by enforcement, meaning that you're not just looking at data in terms of, oh, we are publishing this. You're looking at, have you done data protection? Have you done information verification? So you're able to couple enforcement and transparency. So you just don't have avenues of just transparency, but then how do you enforce these things? So those are some of the key elements. When it comes to challenges, I think there are quite a number, but I'll just highlight maybe 2 or 3. Of course, the main challenge would be resistance, because when it comes to new things, new changes, there is a lot of platform resistance. One of the countries, especially in Canada, we saw that there was a withdrawal. Actually, in Australia, there was a withdrawal of Facebook News when they were presented with those regulations of having to enter into bargaining agreements and all that. So we find those platform resistance, especially in the major digital news content creators. And then also, of course, because there is no proper regulatory framework, there is lack of precision. So yes, there is a framework, but we are not clear on what it does and what it does not do. And then finally, of course, uneven distribution, because even when you have a media bargaining agreement, or you have a structure in terms of this is how you're going to go about it, more often than not, you'll find that the digital platforms that have a bit more muscle are able to get away with some of these things because of the gaps that we have in the legal system. So that has also been a major challenge, because even if there is revenue being generated, how it's being trickled down to the various users within that model can be quite a challenge. So I think that's what you were able to highlight.
Thank you so much, Catherine. So basically, we're saying that there's legal frameworks that are in place. In some instances, they've worked. In some instances, they've been some kind of resistance. So over to you, Tim. In all of these sort of experiments that have taken place in different countries, what is your view, and what do you think is adaptable for our media here in Africa?
I think it's a good question, and I mean the challenges with a lot of studies is always they're not from the global south when they do them, you know. So Australia and Canada are interesting, and there's a lot of learnings, but the environments are vastly different. The kinds of media outlets, even when they're community media outlets, are vastly different structured. The industry's far more established. There's been more education, so it's challenging when we have a look at these things. You know, I mean, when we take a look in terms of local context, you know, like in the Canadian story, I really enjoyed. There was a news publication that basically stood up to Google on their own, and they refused to take the Google advertising on their website, and they basically had this standoff with Google along the whole thing. And their premise was that they were losing traditional revenue to these digital guys, and they weren't getting anything back. And they basically stood their ground, and they managed to go back to almost the traditional model that Telda was talking about. But it wasn't it wasn't critical. It wasn't a critical publication, and they ran the publication kind of because it was a passion project. In some of the areas that our media operates in, the media is critical. It's critical for education. It's critical for safe messages. It's critical for survival. So can we afford to try and take these models and blend them when what we're dealing with is we're dealing with people who require a platform because they simply don't have any funds available to create their own. So it's challenging. I think for me the thing is it's never going to be clean cut. So the research is going to change, and we're going to introduce more of these concepts, but the platforms keep on changing as well. And I think that also creates a layer of complexity, is that the evolving media landscape, if we had this conversation 6 months ago, some of that's already changed. So how do you keep up? In a sense, I almost want to say to you, I'm not convinced that at pure ground level, at Kariba in Zimbabwe, that those people can take a learning from Canada and immediately translate it to their benefit.
I hear you, Tim. So, Telda, in your work in the civic space, so how do the political and the institutional contexts that we have here in Africa, how can they shape the feasibility of this revenue sharing between these traditional public interest media and the platforms?
Okay, thank you. It's an interesting question. I just wanted to say first on what Tim was saying that I agree with that sometimes those models are great, but translating them here to the global south is a big challenge. For example, for most of the media that are here in the global south, here in Africa, where do you find the office even of Meta or of Facebook? Just for starters, maybe somewhere in Johannesburg or Kenya, and they only have like a marketing office and not one for policy and regulation, even for things like IP and so forth. So turning to what is it that can be done, especially like in the civic space, I'll just offer an attempt from Zambia. There was an attempt November 2024 through pushes from civil society, the adoption of a motion on the monetization of social media and inclusive of all content creators and media as well. So not just like an attempt for media only, but inclusive of others. So while it was just a motion only, and it did pass that motion in Parliament, it sort of like opens legal pathways for people to start imagining policy in terms of this, or in terms of laws even around monetization. I think the basis of the moving of the motion was just saying there's a lot of content creators in Zambia who are not able to benefit because of how things are structured. You know, if you need to receive money, you need to receive money through Facebook. It has to be through a PayPal account and so many other things, even around intellectual property. So the media cannot push for something as big as that on its own. The traditional media has to join with other content creators. In this case, in Zambia, it was with influencers, with comedians, with musicians, and so forth. And that's how it sort of got listened to. And it's also by trying to move the regulators, in this case, the government, to also make the negotiations with the platforms, rather than the media also trying to negotiate with the platforms, because the political power is very small when it comes to individual settings and so forth. But also wanted to say politically, the only reason why you would have a motion like that being successful is that the government also looks at what is in it for them. And for them, what was in it was they were seeing possible taxes in terms of the monies that content creators and media would make online. So that was their big motive for backing that, not necessarily backing because they are so interested in the survival of private or independent media, but in terms of, oh, what can we also make? And I think the challenge that then also comes with the clamoring of regulatory frameworks, Bridget, such as this one, is that then if you have a repressive government, sometimes they can go even a step further now than just thinking about monetization and misuse such laws for further control. So I think finding that balance is something that's going to be very difficult. But I think we have to think about it, that our governments need to, we need to get them on our side to also further these discussions with the platforms rather than trying to do it by ourselves as media.
Thank you, Telda. So that brings me to you, Catherine. It's like the you know the function and intention of government in all of this is different. It's not necessarily people-centric. And that's on the one hand. On the other hand, the governments themselves don't really have contracting capacity with these big platforms. So in Kenya, can you just tell us what it's been like when it comes to, first of all, the role of contractual negotiations in these kinds of arrangements where you'd like some revenue sharing, and the role of the legislative, the regulatory frameworks as well?
Yeah, so at the moment, just to be honest, most of these contractual negotiations are more or less voluntary. They are not regulated or recommended when it comes to the legal landscape. So you find a lot of them are voluntary, and so it is very difficult to enforce anything because it is based on somebody's goodwill, an organization's goodwill. And then one of the gaps that we identified in a lot of the Kenyan law is that they do not necessarily acknowledge or even talk about the digital content creators. The only part that has been captured was the issue of taxing, and that was with the wider range. But when it comes to now the media space, there is not much that is mentioned in terms of our laws to deal with the digital landscape. A lot of our laws are tailored to the traditional media outlets, the traditional definition of who a journalist is, not looking at the changing landscape. So we find what would be a good avenue in terms of the regulator and also the government taking charge is by creating a sort of structure where how the traditional and the digital space interact, there is a specific regulation to it. Because currently, all the regulations are tailored towards the traditional media outlets. The digital ones are only covered in terms of tax, but not in terms of operations. So there isn't a lot that is covered or that is regulated in terms of consumer protection, in terms of competition, in terms of intellectual property, and even in terms of the communications authority. So I think what we noticed now in other models that we were looking at is that there has to be an option to introduce things like mandatory provisions, maybe not all provisions relating to creating a relationship between the traditional and the digital, but there has to be some sort of direction. Then number two, there has to be the inclusion of the digital content creator as part of the media community, as part of the media mainstream, so that they are also acknowledged and held to the same standard as a traditional media outlet when it comes to publishing, when it comes to circulating any information. Then another thing is the issue of addressing things like content distribution, supporting how contracts are done around content distribution, so that then one party is not then found in a position where they're being undermined or they're not getting value for money. So you find a lot of the time there is need to have some sort of like a standard when it comes to when you're negotiating, when you're doing a bargain, when you're doing a revenue sharing agreement, what are the guidelines? So that it's not merely voluntary where parties, come with a take it or leave it kind of mentality, but they come with a mentality where what can we benefit from one another. Then again, the issue between A and F, we are able to give you these guidelines, and this is the bare minimum. Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. So over to you, Tim. So beyond the legal side of things, what are the practical things that we can consider so that our media houses are able to sustain themselves and so that they have better bargaining power?
I think it's a good question, and I don't think the model between understanding how to sustain yourself digitally and how to sustain yourself traditionally differs that much. I think the challenge with a lot of practitioners is that when they started doing what they were doing, they were good journalists. So they found the stories, they lived in communities, they knew how to translate the story into something that was valuable. So they make good journalists and they make great editors. But when they were developing the content, they didn't have the background to develop the business plan that Telda referred to earlier. They didn't understand what model do I need to create a newspaper or a WhatsApp community that is able to sustain itself without me. So very often I find that founder journalists or founder editors who then start running uh, outlets or media companies, their skill set is what got them into the business. None of these people are accountants. None of these people have traditional business training, and most of them don't run any other businesses. So, like from that perspective, we need to have a look at it and say, well, when you create this thing, what model do you need to have that's going to work for this? So if you're going to have a Telegram group, what model do you need to have? That's the one thing. So can we have a look at the model? Then we have to say, strategically, are there too many people doing the same thing in a marketplace? So if there's only $100 to go around, if you've got 100 outlets all trying to do the same thing, it's $1 each that you might get. So, strategically you have to say, I might have something which I think is valuable, but are there too many other people that I'm competing with? So I don't think we're going to have a look at the strategic positioning of ourselves. And then I think for me, one of the big issues around media sustainability, whether it be traditional or in this digital space, which is so much more challenging very often, is that we actually don't understand the operational complexities. So what does it cost to run our business? If you're running an entire publication on a cell phone and you lose the phone, you've lost your viability and your sustainability because your connection to that world is gone. But when a guy goes and creates a WhatsApp group and he gets 5,000 people to join it, he doesn't think about the sustainability beyond its money. Sustainability is about the entire value system, the whole ecosystem that keeps this thing propped up, which includes security, safety, backup. There's so many things. And I think systematically we don't approach it from logical things. Like we get onto a thing, we have maybe some quick wins, some good success, and then we're in this thing and we're running it. And then we lose the password. And that's it for the Telegram group. We can't get back in. We worked with a guy in Swaziland in lockdown. He created a group of 25,000 people on Telegram. And then he lost the password to the SIM card. And he had created this entire community that was very vocal and very passionate. And he locked himself out of it. He couldn't get back into his own community. That is not sustainable. So what is sustainability? It's not just about the money. It's about so many other things.
Thank you for that, Tim. So looking at it holistically, I'm coming back to you, Catherine. So, our regulators, the Communications Authority or the Competition Authority, how can they be empowered to address this and to support the more holistic sort of sustainability issues?
I think, of course, one of the biggest ways to enforce any, or rather to empower any entity, is through capacity building. I think one of the gaps that is there in terms of this enforcement of some of these bargaining agreements or revenue sharing models is the fact that there's a lot of cross-border interactions because you find some of these digital spaces are not resident or their jurisdiction is not within the country. So there's need for a lot of capacity building for cross-border enforcement, so that then you're also able to know how to enforce different laws, different rules within different jurisdictions and different ways. Another way to empower these different entities is collaboration. One of the entities that we have in Kenya is called the Media Council of Kenya, which is the one that deals primarily with professionals and issues of ethics. So one of the things that needs to be done to empower authorities like the CA and the CAK is avenues of collaboration, because once they collaborate, they are also able in terms of what the professionals are going through, what other entities and outlets are also going through. Again, another great initiative that could happen for empowerment is amendments of the current laws that we have, because through these amendments, you're able to introduce things like giving the different authorities the powers to oversee different things, to license different things, to be able to enforce different things. So there is a great need to have a lot of changes or several changes in the legal framework, so that you're also able to have a chance to give this authority the legal mandate and the legal power to be able to do all these things. Then of course the other thing would be to designate platforms that create a sort of like in Kenya we have this concept of public-private partnerships. So you can create such platforms where the communication authority or the competition authority is able to partner with private entities in matters of coming up with policies, coming up with regulations. So there is an avenue for there to be partnership between these entities that are given the mandate for enforcement and the actual recipients of these rules and regulations. So I think those are some of the ways that we can be able to empower these authorities.
Mm-hmm. And so over to you, Telda, from a community perspective. So how can we ensure that these, models of sharing revenues not only uphold transparency, but also inclusivity, so that public interest journalism and community voices benefit also, not just the commercial media?
Yeah, so it's even harder, I think, for all these problems that are being said for maybe bigger media or like mainstream media are even more difficult for community media. You'll find that when we are doing legal and policy reform, they are hardly being invited to the table to contribute to these sort of issues. I think I'll just give an example. Like Zambia has been trying to reform quite a number of laws, the Independent Broadcasting Act and the National Broadcasting Act as well. And you can see, I think from that the voices are in the capital, and all these others that are like public interest, smaller media, community media, are not involved at all. I think also the understanding of legal frameworks amongst journalists, of which I am one, is very, very poor. If you ask sometimes in the countries that I am working in the SADC region, what are the laws that are governing you as a journalist, or yourself as a media house, people don't know. Journalists, I don't know, two things journalists that I think journalists don't like: numbers and reading laws. So this really works against against us in making those inputs, and then we end up having like a lot of problems and confusion, because often when you see the government is moving to reform law and policy, they are reactive because something is affecting them. Or affecting their ability to control, not necessarily because they are interested in improving the environment. So this is something I think to really, for civil society to find ways to for media to be included in law and policy reform, especially this issue of like, okay, revenue sharing. And just another point on that, we are very poor as media also at innovating and moving with the times, as it were. Right now, trust in media has been in the sharpest decline in a lot of countries, in a lot of regions for a while. The advertising model has broken down, and the eyeballs have moved away to other audiences. Even with artificial intelligence, we are only tapping into the sort of like generative AI or the presentative AI, where you have like an AI bot presenting, whether it's the news or whatever it is. And we are not producers as media of AI. We really wait until the house is on fire. And like Tim said, we don't have that business innovation in media. So whether it's innovating new things, we are stuck sort of like in the old ways of thinking. And it's time to rethink, maybe journalism as we knew it is dead. And we need new things, or new things are going to overtake us as they are already. So yeah, just some things to think about. Thanks.
Thank you, Telda. I think what's been highlighted here is that journalists are much like lawyers. We don't like numbers as well. But at the same time, we're not very good at running businesses. But I'm coming over to you, Tim. And really this is a question for everyone. And I know some people in the audience might want to respond to it as well. What is the role that bodies such as the African Union or SADC can play in trying to harmonize this revenue sharing, the regulation of revenue sharing? Yeah.
I think the good thing about lawyers is at least you read the law. So, I mean, that's a great place to start. I don't think I'm well positioned to answer your question, and I'll tell you why. A lot of my experience is commercially backed. And commercial media, so big media, big radio stations, big television stations, big publishers, do their best not to play with government bodies and institutions because it complicates things for them. So in all my experience, we would shy away from trying to do anything in the SADC region. Because why? The pot of money is only so big. And as soon as we have to let any of our friends into it, one, we're going to lose our IP. Two, we're going to dilute the pot of money. And three, the people that we have got might decide to go somewhere else. I think the other thing that we find, and Telda also alluded to it, is that we need to take it more seriously. You know? So when you're looking at things in the SADC region, or you're looking at things in Central Africa, or even if it goes to the UN, right? Where does media sit when it comes to some of the other continental or global issues? You know, so when it comes to some of these things, it's not at the top of the agenda. You know, when people are fighting wars, all of a sudden community media in Africa takes a bit of a beating because the money's going somewhere else. You know, and are the African Union worried about that, or are they worried about the deals with mining and agriculture where there's real money and the opportunities for economies to tank? The media doesn't tank an economy, but agriculture can tank an economy. You know, so this is a challenge. Like, we're important, but are we that important? You know, so I mean, I don't know what those conversations look like, but I don't think they've been taken as seriously for our business as they could.
Yeah, thank you. So I think like the continental bodies obviously do play a role, and they can keep playing a role. So for example, the development of principles and guidelines, you know, just like we have the Malabo Protocol, we've got the African Union Commission's data protection principles and so forth. And those are helpful, right, at national level in terms of trying to develop law and policy. Yeah, at SADC level, we can see a little bit of success, I think, around what was the model law on cybersecurity and cyber crimes, that, okay, it was a starting point for the countries to start around developing their own national legislation. But of course, we see that, okay, the nations choose then individually, often, which is to go a step too far in terms of even what the guidelines would have recommended, and develop and adopt something which is totally much more draconian than what would have been agreed at that level. So I think it would be a good starting point if there is a lobby, like I think by civil society at that level, of starting to develop some principles, some guidelines around revenue sharing, around platforms, and link it together with maybe with data protection as well, because that at least that gives a starting point. Because I think for countries such as Zambia, the problem now is, okay, the motion is passed on monetization of social media, and then what? There is no other reference point. The skill set is very low in terms of what exactly can be done in terms of legislation, what is feasible and what is not. So those are starting points, but they are not the end goal, because as we know, we have very nice principles as well on some things, but they are not translated to the bottom. And then I think it's also about partnering with other sectors. So for example, with intellectual property, this is not a media realm only. It's a much bigger realm than media. So I think just stopping the narrowing of focus, like us media, we want this by ourselves. I think that doesn't work a lot, because in all fairness, the governments don't like us a lot. As media, independent media, and it's understandable why. So they are unlikely to pass or work on big legislation that is favorable to us. But if we are able to work with others in other sectors, such as the creatives that I spoke about, such as intellectual property and how it affects private business, then you can see some movement that also would cover sort of like the media. So there's a role at regional and continental level, but we mustn't overstate its importance.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so from a legal perspective, Catherine, what role do constitutional rights play? The right to freedom of expression, access to information. Can we leverage those so that there's some kind of equitable distribution here of profits?
So I think one of the roles that you find the legal framework, maybe like constitutions, they can play in terms of making sure those revenue sharing laws and policies are adopted and followed, is by creating judicial oversight and also safeguards. So one of the provisions that are there in terms of the legal platform is to ensure that there is some sort of judicial oversight, in the sense that if we are to go in this direction of revenue sharing, collective bargaining, creating these new policies, what is now the backstop when it comes to the law? How do I come and get a recourse if these things are not followed, if these things are not done the right way? So another thing is by essentially making room for sustainability of media independence, in the sense that there will be a balance that is being struck between the revenue collection and also the reinvestment into the spaces in media that are required more, especially in issues of verification of information, access to information, issues of data protection as well. So those are some of the ways that the Constitution and other laws can be able to, promote some of these things. Another thing is by also providing the guardrails of what are the limits to freedom of the media and also access to information. So I know in some countries there are already other resultant statutes that
Right. Thank you, Catherine. So I'm just going to come back to you, Tilda. Sort of one last, comment. If you could recommend one, legal or policy intervention, what would it be? And then I'm going to come over to you as well, Tim. Same question.
That's a hard one. So I think a legal policy intervention would be, for the governments to try and open some form of I don't want to say negotiations, but legislation of platforms in country, which is difficult. It's very hard because these platforms are like transcending across borders. But we can see what happens with platforms, right? So Facebook, when they were asked to comply with the general data protection guidelines of the EU, we all thought in the beginning that it's not possible that social media giant like that would listen to those guidelines and actually begin to change things. But it's law now, and they abide. It's only when those platforms come to Africa, because we don't have and are not strong in terms of regulating them, that they are free to just roam from the top to the bottom of the continent. So I would say not copying the GDPR of Europe, but at least starting to see that legislation can work, and that the big platforms, they will listen when it also concerns their profits, just like it happened with GDPR. The same will happen now with the artificial intelligence guidelines in Europe, that they will listen in terms of producing harmful content and so forth. So I believe we can do the same with revenue, of which African media is literally getting nothing from these big platforms.
For me, I'd like to reference broadcasting in South Africa in the early 90s. What would happen, because there was so much change, the broadcasting sector got left behind in terms of policy and regulation, because they were working, government was working on so many other things. But what the sector did is it came together and they started self-regulating, so that when they sat down with government, they could already say, we've already formulated structures, procedures, frameworks, and so we've basically giving you 3/4 of what we think is important. So it makes the conversation easier, and you're being very proactive. So I think almost the reform that I would like to see is that as media, we're able to come together and leave whatever the political issues are at the door and start creating elements of self-regulation, so that when we get into a room at a competition commission with Google or Meta, we're all on the same page and we're not fragmented in these conversations with some of the bigger people. So for me, I think the thing that I would want to see is the ability to create self-regulation, to be more powerful when working with government and some of these big corporates.
Thank you. Catherine, any one last recommendation that you think is most important from a legal or policy perspective?
Yeah, I think one of the main recommendation I would make is to have an industry-led kind of design, so that, because one of the issues that I mentioned earlier, which has been a challenge across all platforms, is the issue of resistance, because some of these changes are introduced maybe arbitrarily, or there is not much stakeholder engagement. So my recommendation would be to start from a point of, have it as an industry-led kind of engagement, so that the stakeholders are the ones that are participating. There is enough context, you're able to give contextual solutions. You're also able to have evidence-based policy making, so that you're not just making policies in a vacuum. You're also able to build a consensus, so that people are able to welcome this because they understand it, because they welcome it, they know what it's going to do for them, and even the media landscape. And also to create that level of collaboration between the two entities, by not essentially trying to erode one another, but trying to build on one another, so that you create some sort of symbiotic relationship. So my main recommendation would be, in as much as there is all this drive to, have these rules, have these regulations, have these policies, I would recommend it be a stakeholder-based or an industry-led kind of negotiation, so that then you're not having a lot of back and forth and a lot of resistance, and people are part of the process. Because I believe generally what I've seen in a lot of the African context, people are happy to be part of the process, and they welcome something and they carry it much better and they implement it wholeheartedly if they are involved in that process. Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions now. Anyone with a question for any of the panelists on what we have just been discussing? Yes, Dennis.
Thank you very much. My name is Dennis Mafusire from Malawi. I wanted to ask in relation to self-regulation that you touched on. Like I know in Malawi, there is a Media Council of Malawi, but also there is MISA Malawi. And I think the speaker from Zambia talked about the Media Council of Zambia. I don't know if there is anything that you can speak to in terms of what these institutions have done in terms of revenue sharing, but also collective agreements in advancing their interests as media, bringing together bringing together the media practitioners so that they can speak with one voice. So that's one, but also I think leading back to issue of sustainability, I think this goes back to that as when you're looking at revenue at the moment, traditionally, it has gone down. But with these openings online, there is opportunity for sustainability. So I wanted probably use as speakers to speak to the role of these self-regulatory institutions in these areas. Thank you.
Tilda, you can take that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dennis. So yes, the Self-Regulatory Council of Zambia is new, very new. Like I think it was just launched. Is that there is no incentive for them to come together with other media because they are sustained politically for political reasons. So then those divisions sort of like become a problem. But I'm sure it's also the same in Malawi that those that are working on self-regulation of media are not thinking beyond just ethics and just journalism as a profession, and are not thinking at all about joint work on media sustainability. So yeah, it's a challenge, and that's what we have in Zambia.
I think maybe also the conversation for me around sustainability is very often it's in its infancy. I was exposed to some discussions in Sudan recently where there's a fair amount of trauma happening in the country, and trying to work with media organizations to ensure that the information coming out of Sudan isn't touched by government and politics, so that A, the world can see what's going on, and that people in the country can get reliable information. And when the conversation started, 4 or 5 bigger media houses were all very keen to work together. But then the one media house managed to get grant money from an NGO or in the NGO space. And then all of a sudden at the next meeting, the entire conversation changed. Because if they were to continue with the conversation, they would have to share the money. You know, so it's almost like kids fighting about sweets on the playground. So there's those challenges. The pot of money, or the part, I'm going to use the word free money, is small, and it becomes very complex when we run these things. In terms of sustainability and basically industries coming together, and I love what Catherine said is, you know, like, when we unite, it makes those conversations, it makes them easier. I think from my context, the challenge around those conversations is they're always around policy and regulation and licensing, but never about the money. And it's what Telda said, when the big guys have to talk about the money and the taxation, they check out. So sustainability, it's never the front and center of the conversation. And that's why it almost sometimes feels to me we go around in these circles. I mean, one of the last things that I want to touch on from a South African perspective is, and I think a lot of people in the room would know of a publication called the Daily Maverick, which is a beautiful example of independent journalism and often hailed as the poster child of sustainable media, find themselves in a really difficult and challenging place. They're retrenching people, their models haven't kept up with the way that the digital landscape has moved, but they're on their own. So it's almost like you don't hear of anyone saying, let's get together with the Maverick to try and fix this. The Maverick are on their own doing this. So we don't, as an industry, we don't come together and say, well, if the poster child of sustainability is battling, what about the rest of us? We basically watch them drown. And I think there's our problem. We need to come together.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Telda. Any other questions from the audience? Also comments really relating to any kind of, or recommendations that you might have? None? Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope we're all doing well. It has been after lunch after all, so we are nice and full. My name is Toini Nekundi, and I serve on the Council for Deaf People in Namibia. And my question is about the text that we were discussing here today. African countries do receive free, they can use internet, some places for free. And for some time, it has been that there are different ways that I've noticed. Some countries pay for it through tax, they pay the internet tax, but we do not necessarily do that in Namibia. So there's been some sort of we've been stuck in some sort of sense when it comes to that. And then all over Africa, we do have partnerships. There are different projects. I've seen similar things all over the world. Many people are launching different projects and partnering with big companies like Facebook. But what about us? How can we get involved in those type of initiatives? I mean, we are in a time where we are talking about internet safety, but we are not involved in projects that have to do with internet safety. So I would want us to maybe get involved and try to think how we in Namibia can try to add similar organizations or similar launches of organizations that can help promote, especially inclusivity for deaf communities. I would really like us to not just continue advocating in September during Deaf Awareness Week, but to continue this type of things and hopefully spread it all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there's a lot that you touched on. So there's a lot that you touched on in your presentation. I think the first part of it would be to do with the tax, the internet tax, and I'm not sure whether that's a good thing necessarily or not. Most people are complaining about that. But on the other hand, the partnerships to do with partnering with Meta or with Google, I think I'm going to hand it over to Tim a bit to talk a bit about the South African perspective and how they've tried to engage Google, but also to mention that the engagement with these platforms is not a fair playing field necessarily. And then I would hand over to Catherine to give us the Kenyan perspective on that as well.
I think the conversation around the engagement with big media, so Google, Meta, is interesting. The South African context, they were hauled before the Competition Commission, and I mean, basically, I think it went on for the better part of 18 months, where there was a lot of talking going on, and at the end, they kind of said to them, well, you'll pay X amount for where you currently are. And I mean, that amount is 260 million South African rand, which is a lot of money. But in the scale of what Google does, it's no money. You know, so they didn't come on their own, they were called. You know, so how do you get them to voluntarily say, well, we're going to create these things? And that's why the studies that Catherine alluded to in Canada and Australia are interesting, because there might be opportunity to try and get them to be more proactive, but they're not going to surrender money before they've asked to do it. And then, I mean, the other thing is, I'm aware of this fund that Google has basically sponsored for media working with organizations. The money hasn't been started to get distributed yet, and there's already the fighting. There's already who's getting it, why is it, what's the politics around it, you know, so it's kind of, we sometimes are our own worst enemy, and that can be challenging. So, I mean, I suppose to answer the question here is, there's never a magic pill. There's not a one solution that we can roll out. There may be solutions, and they need to say, how do we tailor make it to our own environments? And I think one of the challenges when you are from a smaller community and potentially a marginalized community, you have to fight that much harder to get yourself into the room or as part of the conversation. And that's really hard, because you're basically starting way at the back of the room when some of them are already at the front.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Telda.
yeah, thank you so much for your intervention. I think the government is always a good starting point, right? Because we can see in a lot of our African countries, there have been attempts, or there is a social media tax, right? I think Uganda tried it. Zambia also has got a social media tax, and of course some taxations that are leveled on internet service providers. The government is also very good even at leveling taxes, for example, for HIV and national taxes on everyone who works in terms of like HIV. So it should be possible for us to also start thinking about lobbying the same governments to say, in terms of universal access or the right to access the internet for everyone, for persons with disabilities, for people who are in rural areas, if there is a tax that is collected for using the internet, how do we channel that back to such communities, such marginalized persons, so that they are able to access the internet? Because clearly the power to legislate and the appetite is there, but it's just the misuse of the money now. When the money comes in, it's not used like to improve public infrastructure. It's not used, for example, to develop apps or applications that can be used by people who have visual impairments, or people who have got certain disabilities and so forth. And there are these apps, the possibilities of sponsoring innovators and startups, so that, you know, the internet becomes universally accessible. So I totally agree that, yeah, for universal access, legislation is possible, but it's just that the appetite of the government is poor.
Thank you, Telda. Over to you, Catherine.
Yes, I'll allow my colleague Rachel to just give a few pointers there. Hello, everyone. So in the Kenyan perspective, we currently we haven't started those conversations yet with the digital platforms. While it would be nice, at the moment, we're still not having those conversations at the moment. For now, it's just party-to-party, voluntary communications and negotiations, but it has not yet, we haven't started having our government having those conversations now to help us be able to have an equal leverage with these global digital platforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we've received 2 questions online, and we have to really wrap it up, but I just want to pose these to the panelists. So the first question is, how do we bring lawyers on board? And I guess this one's for you, Catherine and team. And the second question is, how do we define equitable? Telda and Tim. These are for you. So I'll start off with you, Ashitiva.
So I think in terms of bringing lawyers on board, there are definitely various aspects, and I think this is part of it, what ISLP is doing, which is very commendable, is involving the legal field in terms of, these ideas that you have in terms of the policies, the changes you want to see. Then lawyers are involved in terms of giving you the legal perspective, allowing you to understand how you can be able to balance the commercial side, the media side, to the legal landscape, and also to know what are some of the gaps that you can find, what are some of the issues that are happening. For instance, now in this research, which I believe would be accessible from ISLP, we were able to give context to what's happening in the traditional media spaces and also the digital media spaces. And one of the biggest gaps is the digital media space is not captured in most of these laws. So even when you talk about, starting from a collective bargaining or revenue sharing, you're dealing with, for lack of a better word, a ghost. So the first avenue would be to start by making reforms to the legal landscape so that these digital spaces are also onboarded as part of the media landscape in a country. So once you onboard them to be part of the media landscape, then now you begin that conversation. But as long as they are operating as, persons that are not covered by any media laws, they are not operating under any specific regulations, it becomes very difficult to have even those conversations with them, because their reasoning is, I am just doing this, I'm just sharing information, I'm expressing my freedom. But once a regulator comes in and they put in these structures and say, if you're doing ABCD, then you fall within this scope, and these are the rules that you need to abide by, then you start from there. So the legal profession is very critical in, one, making these reforms. Number two, in being able to, pronounce them and be able to say, this is how this is going to run, this is what we are going to do. And then also to be able to give context to the media professionals and the media outlets, give them the context in terms of the law, what you want to achieve versus what is there and versus what can be done. So I think the biggest contribution that we as lawyers have is to be part of this conversation, so that even from the start, we are able to give you that legal perspective, and we are also able to tell you this is how to move from point A to point B.
How do we find equality? I think I'm going to go to my primary school English teacher and George Orwell's Animal Farm. All animals are created equal, some are just more equal than others. I don't have an answer to that. And if we haven't found it from Orwell in 2025, it's still an issue we're grappling with.
Yeah, thank you. So I think equitable would mean that it should the systems should be fair. The platforms should be fair. We're not necessarily talking about just taking a mass amount of money and redistributing from one group to the other. It's about creating a system that is fair, so that those who are media producers, content producers, traditional media and so forth in the global south who are putting content have a fair chance, because the system that is created gives them a fair chance to be able to also make revenue. And I think the best way to see sort of some equitability would be that there shouldn't be a huge difference between the global south and the global north in terms of distribution of that revenue. But most importantly, I think for me, equitability means fair systems. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of our panel, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today. I don't know, I feel like we need to give one round of applause for these wonderful panelists. Catherine, Telda, Tim, thank you so much. Thank you.